Hello my beautiful watchers, let me take you back before the disappointing bloated mess of the 2012 Hobbit trilogy, before the smash hit Lord of the Rings adaptations at the turn of the millennium, even before Ralph Bakshi rotoscoped Middle-earth into existence in the 70s, all the way back to June 30th, 1967. Picture yourself as a resident of New York City, out for your daily constitutional, minding your own business, enjoying the hustle and bustle of the busy streets. Suddenly you are approached by a gentleman. He asks if you'd be interested in watching the premiere of a movie. It's a brand new adaptation of a book that's really taking off right now, and all it will cost you is a dime. You hesitate to spend even that paltry amount on a film you've never heard of, but that's no trouble. The man gives you 10 cents to give back to him as payment and takes you inside. What follows is almost certainly the most confusing 12 minutes you've had in a long time. After watching the piece, you're asked to sign a form acknowledging that you technically paid to see this film and go about your day, probably forgetting all about the strange incident. Little do you know, the man you spoke to was Gene Deitch, accomplished animator and director, and for the next 45 years, you would remain one of the mere handful of people who have seen the first ever on-screen adaptation of the works of JRR Tolkien. What's more, you would have no idea that you had just unwittingly taken part in a scheme that would end up costing the father of modern fantasy $100,000. So yeah, it turns out, against all expectations, there's a worse adaptation of The Hobbit out there than the recent one that featured a love triangle entangled Legolas Super Marioing his way up a falling bridge. I beg you to bear with me all the way through this one, my beautiful watchers, because, in my opinion, the only thing more batshit crazy than the film itself is the story behind its creation. It's a story of incredible opportunities clashing with terrible timing, of cunning plans, and unfortunately, betrayal. This episode was requested on Patreon to be a Lost in adaptation, but alas, it is really not compatible with that format. It's barely even suitable to be an in-name only episode. It's nothing. This film is nothing. It has virtually no value whatsoever as a work of art. I think that I'm safe in assuming that at this point I really don't need to synopsisize The Hobbit for anyone, right? A general understanding of the story is common knowledge. Bilbo Baggins, Lonely Mountain, Dragon, Wizard, 13 Dwarfs, Gollum, Riddles, Rings, Elves, Barrels, Dale, Arkenstone, 5 armies, oh no, Thorin's dead? Yes? Splendid. So we can jump straight into the rundown of what is, and will always be, its first officially licensed adaptation. Please keep that in mind as I describe it. This is an officially licensed adaptation of The Hobbit. The film is available in full on YouTube with a total runtime of 11 minutes 43 seconds. It's animated with massive neon-lit quotation marks around the word, as there's not any actual animation. It's just panning shots of still images, some of which look like they might have been drawn in crayon and sometimes overlaid with an obnoxious amount of flashing lights. It's entirely narrated by a single person who also provides all of the character voices on the few occasions they're given speaking lines. Due to an unfortunate choice of colouring, this voice actor appears at a casual glance to be credited as Herbert Ass. Mr. Ass begins by explaining that in the land of Middle-earth, in the time before men arrived and ruined everything, there existed the city of Dale, rich in gold and gems, the largest and greatest being the heart-shaped Arkenstone. However, disaster struck when Slag the Terrible laid waste to... Wait, hang on. Reginald? The dragon's name is Slag? Like, seriously, you're not joking? Right then. There are only 3 survivors, a watchman who is bad at his job and is absolutely irrelevant to the story, Thorin Oakenshield, the general in charge of the city garrison, and the girl that he appears to be groping, Princess... Look, I've watched this a dozen times, but it's really garbled when Mr. Ass says her name, and there's no official subtitles, so my best guess is Speaker Millabonner.
And Princess Smika Millabonner.
These three are never referred to as dwarfs, so from context, I'm only confident in saying they're not men or hobbits. Turin decides to seek the advice of the great wizard Gandalf, who informs them of a prophecy that Bilbo Baggins the Hobbit is destined to slay the dragon and save everyone. Bilbo himself was having a nice time chillaxing in his hobbit hole until they burst in and eat all of his food. They explain to him what they want him to do, he politely declines but is guilted into it by the princess, who claims that she will try alone if he won't come. Along the way, they're captured by a pair of trolls. No, I do apologise, groans. Yes, apparently they're captured by groans, who attempt to roast them on a spit, but Bilbo uses some sick ventriloquist skills to get them to argue with each other until daylight, and the sun turns them into trees. Hot off that success, Bilbo immediately falls down a hole into an underground cave, where he finds a magic ring that can turn him invisible. He cheeses it away from the previous owner, Gollum, who's a bit upset about that. Finally making it to the lonely mountain in which the dragon slumbers, Bilbo uses his magic ring to sneak into Slag's treasure room and sees the Arkenstone. Hatching a cunning plan, he half-inches it and... oh good lord. The team builds a giant crossbow and uses it to shoot the Arkenstone into the inappropriately named dragon, killing it instantly. Bilbo marries Princess Mika Milovana. They rebuild Dale and rule together for a bit before retiring to live in Bilbo's hobbit hole. The story ends on the suggestion that Gandalf might be back to send Bilbo on another quest someday. So, on top of everything else wrong with this film, you might have noticed that the naming conventions are both inconsistent and bizarre, with some characters retaining their true-to-the-book designations, while others now sound like porn parody titles. You get why I'm so incredulous, right? I mean, it's The Hobbit, you know? 100 million copies sold worldwide. Seeing an officially licensed adaptation that looks this amateur is like if you were watching an embarrassing zero-budget student film from the 80s and suddenly realized it stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Robert Downey Jr. and Carrie Fisher. Maybe there'd be like a love triangle or something now. Kinda wish that was a real film now. So, many questions spring to mind, including, but not limited to, why? And how? How is this a thing? How is this the first officially licensed Tolkien adaptation? Why is it so crude looking and so short? Well, stick with me, my lovelies, because surprisingly, there are answers to all of these questions. Though not unsuccessful by any means in their initial publications between the 1930s and 50s, the books of JRR Tolkien were somewhat limited to the UK and didn't explode into obscene levels of popularity until the second edition paperback copies of the Lord of the Rings trilogy were distributed in America in the mid-60s. Right before this incredible boom, a Mr. William Snyder procured the film rights to The Hobbit, apparently very cheaply due to the book's lack of notoriety. Snyder was an American-born producer who founded Rembrandt Films, a studio in Czechoslovakia that provides cheap outsourcing options for American animations, most notably Popeye and Tom and Jerry. The creative mind behind the company was Gene Deitch, who passed away in April last year, much to the sadness of fans of his illustration and directing work. Rembrandt Films' most notable claim to fame was producing their own movie Monroe, which became the first picture made outside of the US to win an Oscar for Best Animated Short. The one stipulation of the Hobbit contract was they would need to produce a full-color animated film with an official release on or before June 30th, 1967. If they failed to do this then, the license would revert back to Tolkien. Snyder and Deitch apparently had no idea that they had just bought the island of Manhattan for a couple of beads. Snyder had purchased the rights because he recognized The Hobbit was a very skillful piece of writing that was unknown enough to be an interesting jumping off point for Gene to write his own fantasy tale around. Neither men were even aware of the Lord of the Rings and how The Hobbit tied into it. And Deitch set about writing what sounds like quite an ambitious project for a small studio hiding out on the other side of the Iron Curtain, involving a feature-length film sporting musical numbers and a mix of traditional animation and rotoscoping. Unfortunately, it all came crashing down big time when Snyder tried to play hardball with 20th Century Fox and demanded a much higher budget than they were prepared to invest. After all attempts at negotiations failed, the project was officially cancelled. The film rights ended up collecting dust for a year or two until 1967, a mere month before they were scheduled to revert back to the Tolkien estate due to the lack of promised movie. Suddenly, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was all that anyone could talk about. It seemed like a cruel twist of fate had befallen Rembrandt Films. They now had one of the most coveted licenses in the world, but there was absolutely no time to use the book's new popularity to renegotiate with the American studios and produce a profitable film. And that's when Snyder had a revelation. There was still a way to make money from this, and they wouldn't even have to make a real film. The contract stipulated it had to be a full-color film that was released in theaters, but there was no minimum length requirement. Snyder tasked Deitch with making the shortest, cheapest film he could in the next 30 days, and Deitch delivered just in the nick of time, rushing the barely completed product to America and, as you now know, grabbing a bunch of randos off the street to watch his 12-minute narrated storyboard. Having technically fulfilled the contract, Rembrandt Films was now under no obligation to return the film rights to The Hobbit to Tolkien and his crew. Eventually, they reached an agreement to sell them back to him for $100,000, which I am very confident in saying is 100 times the cost of the film they had made. Factoring in inflation, it's close to 800 grand in shitty 2021 monies. Now this, unfortunately, is where the before-mentioned betrayal comes in. Despite him having done all of the work to write, direct, cast, and animate a one-reel film in literal days and personally recruiting an audience to see it, allegedly Snyder did not share one single dime of that $100K with Gene Deitch. The film was then lost to the mist of time for nearly half a century. After Snyder died in 1998, his children took over the studio, and in 2012, his son found the only existing copy and uploaded it to YouTube. It was originally mislabeled as having come out in 1966, but this was later updated when additional records were discovered. Presumably inspired by the memories that seeing it conjured, shortly later Deitch posted an entry on his blog about his late friend. It was compassionate and clearly intended to be as fair as possible, but tea was spilt. The blog is technically gone now, the domain having expired and been bought out by a sport equipment vendor since Deitch's death, but my indomitable researcher Kate was able to find it on the Wayback Machine, and I will link it in the video description. I must stress that this is all hearsay and almost certainly impossible to ever fully prove this long after the fact, and you have to be a little careful when you're only getting half the story, because bias can obviously radically inform memories of events, but Gad, if half of what Deitch said about Snyder is true, then fuck that guy. Gene summarizes in his post what sounds to me like a borderline abusive friendship with a casually misogynistic narcissist. He describes years of Snyder emotionally bullying him, cheating him out of money, and taking advantage of him at his weakest moments. It turns out he had played no creative part in the making of Monroe, leaving Deitch to do most of the work, but happily taking credit for it at the Academy Awards, accepting the Oscar and barely mentioning Deitch in his speech. In particular, the story of the 12-minute Hobbit sounds very different from Deitch's perspective. Instead of a funny scheme to make a ton of cash for little to no work, it's a legitimately tragic tale of shattered dreams. Like with Monroe, Snyder had left all the actual making of the movie entirely to Deitch, who, after being inspired by Tolkien's work, put his heart and soul into preparing for the intended feature-length film. He admits, in hindsight, after Middle-earth's rise to stardom, that some of the changes that he had planned would have gotten him burned at the stake by book-obsessed adaptation fanatics. But he was planning some seriously creative stuff for the animation, including some groundbreaking uses for rotoscoping and 3D backgrounds that sound, on paper at least, even more ambitious than what Ralph Bakshi pulled off over a decade later. When Snyder threatened to walk during the distribution negotiations and was promptly shown the door, Deitch's months of work and effort were completely wasted, and because he was apparently primarily paid in gross percentage, largely unpaid as well. Snyder's bright idea to alternatively monetize the film rights was a demand that Deitch hack the screenplay he was so proud of into something so minimal it was basically gibberish. Getting screwed out of his percentage of the fiscal reward, which, by the way, he refers to as weaseled boodle, earning my admiration, was unfortunate enough, but it was only the start of poor Deitch's torment. The dude had to spend the rest of his life watching a myriad of other people get to shoot their shot at a legitimate Hobbit adaptation, knowing his contribution, the first of them all, would forever be an embarrassing rushed sideshow and a pawn in a technically legal extortion racket. So that's the story of the first and worst Hobbit adaptation, a film that cost virtually nothing to make, cost viewers nothing to see but a dime that was handed to them, but ended up costing JRR Tolkien $100,000 and an animation director named Deitch his dreams of fame and success. You know, I'm starting to see why so few people talk about this now. It's a Bit of a bummer overall. You know, I think that I would have liked to have seen the film that Deitch was going to make, even if it sounds like it would have been a bit off book. Good or bad, at least it would have been a film, unlike the version that Snyder made him cut it down to. Oh, good lord, I've just realised that makes it the Snyder Cut. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Please forgive me for the repetitive diatribe, but I am behooved to remind you that the YouTube algorithm is programmed in such a way as to leave creators with the distinct impression that it's an eldritch nightmare eager to destroy any channel that fails to get enough likes, comments, and new subscribers to protect them from it. So, doing any of those things for me would be much appreciated. If you're interested in extra content, do check out my Patreon page for access to my Discord server and exclusive Lost in Adaptation and podcast episodes. Please take care of yourselves out there in these troubled times, and I hope to see you soon.
Dwarves in this mountain, there's some dwarves in this mountain, there's some dwarves in this mountain, there's some dwarves in this mountain.
I got sword-like fangs, wings hurricanes, slag-ass dragon, bring that Lake Town pain. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, you fighting with this slag-ass dragon. Bring an arrow and a bow for the slag-ass dragon. Gotta get that Arkenstone from this slag-ass dragon. Now send a hobbit, try to rob it from this slag-ass dragon. Lonely Mountain got it shouting for this slag-ass dragon. That fire's hot, hot, hot. That's a slag-ass dragon. Sauron wants me in his plot. I'm a slag-ass dragon.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Hote, Satel Spurtloff, and Kat Harker. Shout out to Ilnej for performing this awesome tune, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's co-producer, Kate Robinson. She does some really amazing work on her channel that I think you would really enjoy, so be sure to check that out too. Audience to see it, alleged... So Terry... just let me know when you're done, buddy. That might be an overly dramatic way of saying, considering it's actually true. Wisps. Why? Again, wizard, 13 dwarves, Gollum. Gollum? I was turning into the bloody guy. A silly cat came to sit on my feet.